The satellite imagery showed nothing unusual. Agricultural complexes in remote regions, manufacturing facilities in industrial zones, mining operations in resource-rich areas, standard economic activity visible from space. But an intelligence analyst noticed something the algorithms missed. The facilities were positioned along specific geographic corridors where 3 continents met. The labor force numbers didn't match economic output, and thermal signatures suggested far more people on site than employment records indicated. This is the story of how a transnational criminal syndicate built a network of underground prison camps across 3 continents. How they imprisoned 293 people in conditions that erased their identities and humanity. And how a coordinated operation across 14 countries liberated every victim and dismantled the entire system. The world never knew that modern slavery was operating in plain sight. Never knew that people were being held in facilities designed to look legitimate while serving as prisons. Never knew that forced labor was generating hundreds of millions in profit for criminal networks, until the secret elite decided these camps needed to be found and destroyed. The invisible prisons. The network had been operating for 7 years. What began as small-scale forced labor in one country had evolved into a sophisticated system spanning 14 countries across 3 continents. The criminal syndicate had recognized an opportunity in gaps between national jurisdictions and international oversight. Remote areas where government presence was minimal. Border regions where law enforcement focused on migration rather than labor conditions. Industrial zones where worker exploitation was common enough that extreme cases went unnoticed. The facilities appeared completely legitimate from outside. Agricultural operations producing crops for export. Manufacturing plants producing textiles and electronics. Mining operations extracting minerals. Each facility had proper business registration, tax filings, and export documentation. But beneath the legitimate appearance, these facilities were prisons. The victims came from vulnerable populations. Migrants promised legitimate employment who found themselves trapped. Individuals with debts told they could work off obligations but were never released. People who simply disappeared from areas where missing persons reports triggered minimal investigation. Once inside, escape was nearly impossible. Facilities positioned in remote locations, often kilometers from nearest town. Victims had identification documents confiscated immediately. They were housed in secure dormitories with minimal freedom. Guards enforced discipline through violence and threats against families. The work was brutal. Agricultural facilities required 16-hour days during harvest. Manufacturing plants operated 3 shifts with mandatory overtime. Mining operations exposed workers to dangerous conditions without safety equipment. Pay promised during recruitment never materialized. Victims were told they were working off transportation costs, housing fees, food expenses. The debt never decreased. The work never ended. Over 7 years, the network had expanded to 23 facilities across 14 countries. Operations ranged from small agricultural sites with 20 to 30 workers to large manufacturing complexes with over 100. Total people imprisoned at any given time fluctuated between 250 to 300. Victims came from 19 different countries. Some held for months, others for years. The longest-held individual imprisoned 5 years, taken as payment for gambling debt, and never released, despite long since repaying the original amount. Facilities maintained legitimacy through careful management of external visibility. Occasional government inspections were staged. Free workers brought in temporarily. Conditions improved for show. Victims coached on responses. Business documentation was meticulous. Products were sold through legitimate supply chains to buyers with no knowledge of how they were produced. The syndicate had built protection through strategic corruption. Local officials bribed to ignore irregularities. Law enforcement received payments to avoid investigating labor complaints. Border authorities paid to facilitate movement of new victims. The network was coordinated by 17 individuals operating from locations where they had achieved effective immunity through wealth, connections, or corrupt protection. These leaders viewed prisoners as economic assets, renewable resources to be exploited for maximum profit. They had created modern slavery operating across international borders, generating hundreds of millions in revenue, imprisoning hundreds of people in conditions violating every international standard. And they believed they were untouchable because they operated in blind spots of law enforcement and international oversight. They were wrong. The pattern that revealed everything. The breakthrough came from an analyst specializing in economic intelligence. She studied trade flows and production patterns, looking for anomalies that might indicate sanctions evasion or money laundering. She noticed something unusual. Certain facilities in remote regions reported production outputs not matching stated labor force size. Efficiency numbers impossibly high. Production per worker far exceeding industry standards. Operating costs suspiciously low. Labor expenses not aligning with even minimal wage standards. She cross-referenced with satellite imagery. Thermal signatures showed far more human presence than employment records indicated. Dormitory buildings larger than necessary for stated workforce. Security measures excessive for standard industrial operations. Fencing, guard towers, controlled access. She compared facility locations. They clustered along specific geographic corridors. Border regions where oversight was complicated by jurisdictional issues. Remote areas where government presence was minimal. Industrial zones where worker exploitation was common. The pattern suggested something beyond standard labor exploitation. These facilities were operating as prisons. The analysts compiled evidence and flagged it up the intelligence chain. Additional resources were directed toward investigation. Surveillance operations monitored facilities. Communications intercepts revealed discussions about inventory management and asset retention, clearly referring to human beings. Financial analysis showed profit margins that only made sense if labor costs were essentially zero. Over 8 weeks, the complete network was mapped. 23 facilities across 14 countries, imprisoning an estimated 250 to 300 individuals. The intelligence picture revealed full horror. People imprisoned for months or years. Forced labor in brutal conditions. Violence maintaining control. Documents confiscated preventing escape. Threats against families ensuring compliance. A systematic apparatus, extracting maximum labor while maintaining legitimate appearance. Investigation identified syndicate's leadership structure. 17 individuals coordinating the network from positions of effective immunity. Financial flows showing hundreds of millions in profit generated over 7 years. Corruption network protecting facilities from law enforcement scrutiny. Most critically, investigation located the victims. Through surveillance and local source reporting, analysts determined approximate numbers at each facility, identified dormitory locations, mapped security measures. Intelligence reached the secret elite with clear assessment. This network represented systematic human rights violations on massive scale. Dismantling required simultaneous operations across 14 countries to liberate victims, apprehend perpetrators, and dismantle protection network before syndicate could move people or destroy evidence. Authorization came within 48 hours. Mission was clear. Find every prisoner, free every victim, end this system permanently. The liberation operations. The operation required unprecedented coordination. 23 facilities across 14 countries. An estimated 293 victims needing immediate liberation. 17 syndicate leaders needing apprehension. Local corrupt officials needing neutralization or bypass. Planning took 6 weeks. Each facility required detailed assessment. Surveillance established guard schedules, security measures, victim locations, optimal entry points. Local assets positioned to provide support without revealing operations scope. 0 hour set for 0300 hours coordinated across 8 time zones. Operations would happen simultaneously to prevent any facility from being warned. Phase 1. Liberate the victims. Teams moved with surgical precision. Each facility operation tailored to specific circumstances but followed same priority. Minimize risk to victims. Secure site. Neutralize guards without giving them time to harm prisoners. At Southeast Asian Agricultural Complex, 47 people imprisoned in secured dormitories. Facility located 15 kilometers from nearest town. Tactical team approached through fields at 0300 hours using night vision. They secured guard posts and coordinated strikes, neutralizing security before alarms. They breached dormitory locks and secured victims. Entire operation took 19 minutes. Eastern European manufacturing facility held 83 people working 3-shift operations producing textiles. Team coordinated with local authorities who believed they were conducting labor trafficking raid. Victims secured. Guards detained. Facility shut down before neighboring businesses knew anything happened. African mining operation held 31 people in conditions violating every safety standard. They worked underground without proper equipment, breathing toxic dust, facing daily risk of collapse. Facility remote and heavily secured. Tactical team approached through difficult terrain and secured multiple buildings simultaneously. Operation required 47 minutes. 2 guards chose resistance and were neutralized. Across 23 facilities, pattern repeated. Each operation tailored to specific circumstances. Each team prioritizing victim safety above all else. By 0600 hours local time across all locations, every facility was secured. Every victim in protective custody. Every guard detained or neutralized. 293 people who had been imprisoned, some for years, were free. Phase 2. Apprehend the leadership. Simultaneous operations targeted syndicate's 17 leaders across 7 countries. 8 leaders arrested through coordinated action, appearing to be domestic organized crime investigations. 5 leaders extracted through classified methods from countries where corruption gave them immunity. 3 leaders attempted flight, all intercepted. 1 leader chose resistance and was eliminated. Within 36 hours, all 17 leaders were in custody, eliminated, or apprehended. Syndicate's command structure completely destroyed. Phase 3. Dismantle the corruption network. Anonymous intelligence packages delivered to internal affairs departments, anti-corruption agencies, oversight bodies in 12 countries. Packages contained documented evidence of bribery, illegal financial relationships, dereliction of duty. 43 officials across 12 countries investigated, suspended, or arrested. Some faced criminal prosecution. Others removed through administrative action. All lost positions and access that made them useful to syndicate. Phase 4. Secure the assets. The syndicate had generated $370 million over 7 years. Financial investigators traced assets through shell companies, offshore accounts, property investments. Coordinated asset seizures occurred across 9 countries. Business accounts frozen. Properties seized. Shell companies exposed and dissolved. $370 million in criminal assets recovered for victim compensation funds and labor protection organizations. The victims who returned to life. Liberation was only the beginning. 283 people freed from prison network faced enormous challenges rebuilding lives. They came from 19 countries, many imprisoned for years. They suffered physical abuse, psychological trauma, serious medical conditions from forced labor in dangerous conditions. They'd been told repeatedly they had no value, no rights, no hope of escape. Immediate priorities were medical care and psychological support. Many required hospitalization for injuries, malnutrition, diseases. All needed trauma counseling. Psychological impact would take years to heal. Logistical challenges were immense. Many had no identification documents. Syndicate confiscated and destroyed them. Re-establishing legal identity required working with governments across 19 countries. Many victims had families who believed they were dead. Reunification required investigation to locate families, verify relationships, prepare both victims and families for reunions complicated by years of separation and trauma. Oldest victim was 62, imprisoned 4 years. Youngest was 17, taken at 14. 97 victims were women subjected to sexual violence in addition to forced labor. Victims' outcomes would vary based on circumstances, support systems, personal resilience. Some would successfully rebuild. Others would struggle for years. All would carry scars of being treated as property rather than human beings. The system that ended. Official records showed coordinated international law enforcement action against human trafficking and forced labor. 23 facilities shut down across 14 countries. 17 syndicate leaders arrested or eliminated. 293 victims liberated. $370 million in criminal assets seized. Records couldn't capture the systematic nature of what was dismantled. This wasn't trafficking that moved people from point A to point B. This was a prison system designed to indefinitely hold people in forced labor while maintaining legitimate business appearance. Facilities positioned strategically across 3 continents exploiting gaps in law enforcement jurisdiction. Operations designed to be self-sustaining and highly profitable. Victims selected from populations where disappearances triggered minimal investigation. Corruption network provided protection. Entire system built to be invisible and untouchable. But satellite imagery analysis revealed the pattern. Economic intelligence identified anomalies. Secret elite coordinated action across 14 countries to liberate every victim and dismantle every element simultaneously. Syndicate's 17 leaders would spend rest of lives in prison or were permanently removed. 43 corrupt officials removed from positions. 23 facilities shut down and assets liquidated for victim compensation. Network operating 7 years imprisoning hundreds of people was completely destroyed. Motorweg. Somerset. The silence that freed hundreds. The secret elite's operational assessment documented numbers. 293 victims liberated from 23 facilities across 14 countries. 17 syndicate leaders apprehended or eliminated. 43 corrupt officials removed. 370 million in criminal assets seized. But most important outcome couldn't be measured in operational statistics. A woman imprisoned 2 years at agricultural facility returned to family who'd been told she died in accident. Joy of reunion mixed with grief of years stolen. Careful work helping her process trauma while rebuilding relationships with children who barely remembered her. A man held at mining facility 3 years received medical treatment for lung damage from years breathing toxic dust. Treatments would help but couldn't reverse all damage. He'd live with reduced lung capacity. Permanent reminder of imprisonment. A teenager taken at 14 and held 3 years in manufacturing facility needed education and psychological support to reintegrate. 3 years of forced labor stole his adolescence and educational opportunities. Rebuilding would take years. 293 victims had different futures ahead. Some would successfully rebuild with support. Others would struggle with lasting trauma. All had been given something they thought they'd lost forever: freedom and possibility of a future beyond captivity. The world never knew how many were imprisoned in modern slavery system operating across 3 continents. Never knew legitimate appearing businesses were actually prisons. Never knew forced labor was generating hundreds of millions while destroying hundreds of lives. Because secret elite doesn't operate for public recognition. They operate to eliminate evil hiding in plain sight. Syndicate believed they created untouchable system. They operated in remote locations, maintained legitimate appearances, built corruption networks for protection, selected victims from populations where disappearances went unnoticed. They accounted for law enforcement constraints, international jurisdiction complications, minimal oversight of labor conditions in certain regions. They never accounted for satellite analysis revealing thermal signatures not matching employment records, for economic intelligence identifying anomalies in production efficiency, for coordinated action across 14 countries liberating all victims simultaneously. In files that don't officially exist, complete record remains. Satellite imagery analysis revealing pattern. Economic intelligence identifying facilities. Surveillance documenting conditions. Operational logs detailing how 293 people were liberated in coordinated strikes. And simple statement capturing everything. 293 imprisoned. 293 liberated. 0 left behind. Syndicate-built prison system across 3 continents. Operated 7 years. Imprisoned hundreds. Generated hundreds of millions. Until someone noticed they existed. Until someone mapped entire network. Until someone coordinated liberation operations freeing every victim in simultaneous strikes. Prisons operating in plain sight as legitimate businesses were destroyed. Victims treated as economic assets were freed. System generating profit from human suffering was ended. And somewhere in those classified files, final notation. 7-year operation terminated. 23 facilities dismantled. 17 leaders removed. 293 souls returned to freedom.